Hi, I'm Father Michael ORSI. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the big G, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the little g, all the good things that people do to put the gospel of life into action. There are some major issues in this election which need to be discussed. And we have to have some guidelines for you, for our listeners, to use when you're deciding who to vote for. Let me be clear. I am not telling you who to vote for. What I am doing today is addressing issues that are very much a part of this election. And I want you to be able to make a good decision as to whom you are going to vote for the presidency of the United States. We have all heard the gospel passage which says, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And some people say, that means there's a separation of church and state. Well, it's not that simple. It's a little more complex than that. We've all heard of a theocracy. That means that the state is guided by religion or by a religious leader. And I suppose the best example that we have of that is in Iran, where we have an Ayatollah that runs the country. That's the first example. The second example that we have is one that maybe you are a little bit more familiar with. It's the confessional church in a state. In other words, the state has a special relationship with a church. We might call it a church state. So, for instance, we have in England the Church of England, which is the official church of the state of Great Britain. Great Britain is a state. The relationship is one whereby the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, is the official church for the state. The last type of relationship that we might have is one that we are more familiar with here in the United States, and it is what we call the separation of church and state. But it does not mean that the church does not have any influence on the state. Maybe not directly insofar as holding any official position in the state, but it does have the right to speak the truth and evangelize the state. In other words, the people of the state, and therefore inform them as to what God's law is and what makes for a good society. Whereas we are not imposing theology on the state, we are proposing what is good for the state and for its people. There are some very important issues that we're going to have to address in considering who we are going to vote for. The first one is the big one. It is abortion. It is abortion. And the parties are radically different on their stances regarding abortion. What I want to do is to present to you some guidelines regarding what the church teaches regarding abortion and how Christians should guide their conscience when they are voting. Abortion is an irreformable prohibition because it is based on natural law, the right to life. And we also find this right to life where? In the Declaration of Independence. What does it say? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it's an absolute prohibition. We don't even have to go to Scripture. Thou shalt not kill. We have it right in our observance of the natural law that human beings have a right to life. And this law is also a law that we know from theologians throughout the ages. What does it say? It is written in our hearts. We know that killing is wrong. We know that killing is wrong from the moment of conception until natural death. And the teaching of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and the New Testament both affirm the sanctity of human life. Throughout the history of the church, there has never been a time when the church has taught otherwise. Even in the great Jewish tradition, the great Rabbi Maimonides also said there is a prohibition against abortion. Therefore, what I'm saying to you now not only applies to Jews and Christians, but it applies to all mankind. There is a natural right to life. There is a natural prohibition against abortion. That is our very, very first and fundamental point. To disobey this is not only to disobey what good human behavior demands of us, not only to disobey the law of God, but it is inconsistent with the founding documents of our country. Point number 2, having said this, and this is specifically for Catholics, but I am sure it applies to all Christians who are believers in the Bible and all of those human beings who believe in reason and science. Every Catholic, as a matter of fact, as I said, every Christian, every human being must oppose abortion, must oppose abortion. We have some people who call themselves pro-choice Catholics. There is no such animal. It's what we call oxymoron. It's a contradiction to say that a Catholic, and for that matter, a Christian, can be pro-abortion. Now, what about Catholic politicians? What about Christian politicians? What can they say? A Catholic politician must say that while I uphold legitimate law, I will not encourage abortion or abortion rights. While I will uphold legitimate law, I will not encourage abortion or abortion rights. Therefore, that means that a politician, a Catholic, a Christian, a faithful Jewish politician must be able to say that I oppose abortion, although in my office I will uphold legitimate laws. And I will add something else. That person also has an obligation to say that I will do all in my power to lessen the negative effects of abortion. In other words, to pass legislation that will limit the number and kinds of abortion that are permitted within their jurisdiction. A Catholic cannot vote for someone who is pro-abortion. You cannot vote for someone who is pro-abortion. And that goes without saying. For someone who is pro-abortion and wants to expand abortion rights, that person is not someone that a Catholic, a Christian, could vote for in good conscience. A Catholic must keep in mind, and I'm saying Catholic because this is a statement from the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, but I think it applies once again to every Christian and every Orthodox Jew, that abortion is the preeminent moral issue of our day and for this election coming up. This is not my personal teaching. This comes from the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. It is the preeminent moral issue. And having said that, the bishops say that this preeminent issue must be weighed against all the other moral issues that are up for discussion and for legislating what is going to take place after the election. We must be able to say that all these other issues, they pale in comparison to the importance of abortion. We have had almost 1 million abortions performed every year in this country. The exact number now is about 875,000 abortions a year. That's without counting chemically induced abortions. That means the morning after pill or the abortion pill. So suppose someone says to you, well, there are other moral issues. How do I weigh this? Well, let's take, for example, the moral issue of capital punishment. Some people say that capital punishment is a moral issue that we need to discuss, and it is. The Pope says it is inadmissible at this point. Now, didn't say it's intrinsically evil, but he said it's inadmissible. But let's look at the numbers. You have 875,000 abortions a year, over 61 million babies killed since Roe v. Wade in 1973. Do you know the number of people who were executed in the United States this past year? The number is 22, and it has only taken place in 7 states. So you can see, abortion, capital punishment, which is the preeminent issue, which has greater weight. The same is true of other moral issues that we are discussing in this election. Take, for example, immigration. Yes, immigration is a moral issue. But there are many ways that we can accommodate people who want to come to this country. Oftentimes, it's simply prudential judgment of how different people see what we can do as a people to allow others to come to our country and to experience for themselves the good things that God has given to the United States of America and to experience our good government. It's a tribute to us that so many people want to come here. However, you well know that open borders might not be the answer. Infrastructure maybe can't handle it. We have to protect against what? Disease, against drugs. So, yes, it's important, but how does that weigh against abortion? Once again, it pales in comparison. And we have to work together, yes, to have a better immigration system, but it cannot and does not supersede the importance of protecting human life. So I think we have some kind of clarity as to what a preeminent issue is, the weight that it holds, and the other issues that, while they may be important, they are not as overwhelming as the problem that we have of abortion, which violates human nature, violates God's law, and violates the Declaration of the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence. As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. Thought for the day. A lot of people think that the religion is only for the next world. Well, it's very much for this world too. It has an impact on our daily lives. Make sure that you take time to know the candidates who are running for office and then to vote for those candidates who are pro-life. Over the last week, former Vice President Joe Biden said that he believes that an 8 to a 10-year-old child could make a decision as to what gender they want to be. Now, having known 8 to 10-year-old children, they are incapable of making usually any good decision. But to make a decision as to what gender they want to be, I doubt that that's possible. Do you know the implications that there is in saying something like that? The vice president says, well, if it makes them happy. First of all, let's be clear about this. Gender confusion is not unusual for young people. However, some young people go through an intense period of some kind of gender confusion. The number is about 0.3%. 0.3%. We also know that when these children do reach puberty, their teenage years, that most of them align with their biological sexual identity. Therefore, there is a consistency with what they think up here and what their body makeup is. If we can take a child and say, what do you want to be? And a lot of children now are confused, and I'll tell you why. A lot of them are learning this in school. And a lot of them have parents that are saying, well, you can make your own decision, and whatever you want to be, you can be. And so we have some little boys that are being dressed up like girls. I know of a case like this. Okay. This is very dangerous. Okay, very dangerous for a number of reasons. First of all, if a parent goes along with what the child decides he or she wants to be, that can begin, and does begin, a series of hormonal injections. Can you imagine injecting a child, 8 to 10 years old, with hormones, with chemicals, in order to enable the child to begin to develop as someone of the opposite sex from the gender with which they were born biologically? Imagine that. And then as time passes and the hormones and the chemicals begin to work, then it comes time for surgery, radical surgery. And this really is mutilation. It mutilates the body of the person, young or old, and it makes them into something that they are not. And this is extremely dangerous. Why? We find out, and these are from studies of Johns Hopkins University, from Dr. McHugh, that oftentimes after this takes place, there is tremendous regret. There is a great amount of depression, and sometimes these people become not only psychosexually ill, confused, but they also oftentimes feel that suicide is their only option. So for anybody that is running for public office to say that an 8 to 10-year-old could make this kind of decision, this is child abuse. And I understand people are talking about being politically correct, but there's also something called stupid. And this is literally stupid. No Christian can support the mutilation of children, especially at the tender age of 8 to 10 years old. The next issue that I know has to be addressed is that the former Vice President, Joe Biden, says he believes in the Equality Act. The Equality Act. Maybe some of you have not heard of this. It's already made its way through Congress, and it received a good number of votes. And the next step would be that it has to go to the Senate, and then, of course, signed by the president. Vice President Biden says he would sign it. Do you know what it contains? It contains this. It says that for LGBTQ plus people, and that plus means practically anything goes. I'm told that there are now over 100 varieties of expression of human sexuality. It means that these people would be entitled to the same rights as those rights given in the 1964 Civil Rights Movement to men and women, and for those of different races, black, or white. Now, that's not what the 1964 Civil Rights Act was about. It was men and women, two sexes that have always been recognized. Why? Well, that's the way God made us, men and women, and also what we find very clearly stated in the Scripture. What does it say in Scripture? God made male and female. This would put religious institutions into great jeopardy. Why? When it comes to hiring people or maintaining people in positions in, for instance, Christian schools, Catholic schools, other Christian or Catholic organizations, these organizations would be subject to the Civil Rights Law of 1964 and this Equality Act. And when this Equality Act is recognized, what happens is that we, religious people, would be violating the law if we did not allow these people to work in our institutions. And what they believe and what they do and how they live and how they act and sure, how they teach is something that is inimical to our Judeo-Christian heritage. That's the first point. The second point is this. It also says that children, young adults, and older adults have the right to use each other's bathrooms and locker room facilities. Now, have you ever heard of modesty? Have you ever heard of privacy? Christians should have heard about chastity. Could you imagine the psychological trauma that this would cause to have people of the opposite sex walk into a shower room and see someone else naked and have them be ashamed of themselves and traumatized by realizing that they have been looked upon or ogled by someone who is not of the same gender? This is unbelievable to think that this could happen. If you're a parent out there, would you like your little girl to be showering, high school student, maybe even a college student, and have some young man who decides that he is a girl to walk into that shower room? What a shock, what a trauma, what a shame that is. And the psychological damage that that is going to cause down the road is going to be exponential. And so I have grave concerns about the Equality Act and that Vice President Biden says he would vote for it. I have very great concerns about transgendered people at a certain age deciding that they would want to be something other than they are as God made them. And lastly, once again, going back to abortion, it is the preeminent moral issue of our time. A Christian cannot vote for someone who promotes abortion. And a politician that promotes abortion is someone who is not being consistent with the natural law, inconsistent with God's law, and inconsistent with the laws of the United States of America and the foundation upon which they are built, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I hope that all of you will take your responsibility very seriously this year in voting. What I said to you is not just religion. Matter of fact, it's very little religion. What I'm talking to you about is reason. What a reasonable person would say. How a reasonable person can decide what is right and what is wrong. And what I've talked to you also about is science. Science tells us there is a baby there. Go look at an ultrasound. Go look at a sonogram. 3D, that's a baby. And you're going to say that it's not? You're going to say it's okay to eliminate that child? Partial birth, up to birth, and now even in certain states, New York and Virginia, the parents will decide if they want to keep that child or not, even after the child is born, and then leave the child to die if they decide against it. That's infanticide. That's unacceptable. That's inhumane. inhumane. That's monstrous. Lastly, I want you to be very much aware that we do have a body that is a gift from God. That body deserves protection. We cannot let political correctness tell us what we should do. We should not let school systems teach things that are contrary to common sense and to science. A boy is a boy. A girl is a girl. To begin to feed them with hormones and chemicals, and then to mutilate their bodies because of some psychological problem that can be worked on and that can be healed, and instead cause permanent damage, is reprehensible. It's reprehensible. It is immoral. It is, a matter of fact, also monstrous. Let us take this opportunity when we vote to vote in an informed way, to vote in a human way, to vote in a moral way. There is a lot at stake. You have the power. You have the power to put our society back on the right track. If we do not vote correctly and the wrong people get into office, let me be clear, we're going to go to hell in a handbasket and lose our beloved United States of America. God bless you, and don't forget to vote. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael ORSI. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.